In terms of our first speaker tonight, I will show a short video before Dr. Gunta Caldwell comes up. But to give you an idea of Gunta's background, she's well accomplished. She's going to talk to us tonight on the gift of love in grief and loss. Gunta has an integrated healthcare approach to wellness, where she combines a variety of qualifications as a chiropractor, nutritionist, and expert in neuro-emotional techniques. Over many years of experience and knowledge, Gunta has introduced vitamins, minerals, herbs and complex homeopathies into her practice to complement the work that she does in working with her patients to enhance their overall wellbeing potential, and Gunta works across all different age groups. She's got a huge amount of experience to back up her credentials, and what she's going to talk to us tonight about is the gift of love in grief and loss. Before I show the video, I'd also like to touch base with what we're all here to, I guess, strive towards, and that is take away some key points that we can implement when we walk away from the evening. So you have a sheet in front of you. Each speaker will hopefully part at least three parts of wisdom upon you that you can jot down and take away and talk around the dinner table, whether it be at work, after tonight's event, or sometime over the next week or so, where you can talk about some of the key messages that you picked up throughout each talk.
The Tasmanian Palliative Care Hospital is taking a groundbreaking approach to teaching high school students about death and dying. The students are not only learning how to treat terminally ill patients, but how to approach the sensitive subject.
Death and dying isn't always an easy subject to raise, but some believe the discussion is nothing to fear.
Yes, I know I have to face the end of life stuff that we have to do. We'll all do it one day. We're all going to go there one day, but mine's more confronting because it could be 6 months.
Virginia de Groot has terminal cancer. The 63-year-old's sharing her experience with students from Guildford Young and St Mary's colleges.
People have asked me about bucket lists. I don't have one because I've lived a great life. I've got grandchildren and I'm happy.
The Year 11 and 12 students are being introduced to nursing, and in a Tasmanian first, are learning about palliative care.
To give students from our local high schools an opportunity to learn about death and dying in a positive way and in a very real way in a hospital setting.
Palliative Care Tasmania and Calvary Hobart have funded the project.
If we can deal with death, then we can in fact have a more full life. I call it fully human, fully alive. And Virginia actually embraced that today, and she personified what we've been talking about.
I guess now I'm a bit more open to talking about experiencing death.
I am going to die, but not just yet.
Yeah. Do you feel more comfortable now that you have a bit more knowledge and stuff?
Yes, you need the knowledge.
Mrs de Groot isn't dwelling on dying, but living a good life.
It's good to see that she's really positive and trying to stay as happy as possible and not as scared anymore.
Some days there's a negative every now and again, but most days are diamonds and every day's a bonus.
A message she hopes these students will embrace. Pablo Vinales, ABC News.
Please welcome Gunta Caldwell to the stage.
Some 20 years ago, we were in the throes of bringing up two beautiful children, aged 4 and 6, as well as working in our respective professions. My husband Ed, who was a cytogeneticist, had established the first cytogenetics laboratory in Victoria, and I was working part-time as a chiropractor, nutritionist and NET practitioner, as well as being a full-time mum. We had a mortgage, we had our group of friends, and I was chairperson of our Latvian School Parents Committee, where our children went to Saturday Latvian school. We wanted to foster and maintain our and their grandparents' culture and language. Plus, of course, we managed all the usual life challenges that we all contend with one way or another in everyday life. So our lives were busy, our children had just started new schools, and my husband was working long hours building up the reputation of his fledgling laboratory, as well as being a founding member of the Australian Cytogenetics Society. Life was rich, busy and seemed fulfilling. no different than that of many other families at that stage of life. We were in our early 40s and our path ahead seemed pretty straightforward. Strange how one day life can take a seemingly wrong turn and suddenly you feel as if you've been blindsided by this change of events. Imagine sitting in a neurologist's office at 8 o'clock at night after your life partner has been examined, only to be told that we should get our affairs in order and that at best my husband Ed had 4 years to live. He had just been diagnosed with MND, that is motor neuron disease, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. This is a severe neurological disorder that selectively affects the motor neurons, that is the nerve cells that control the voluntary muscles of the body. It is a neurodegenerative disease with unrelenting increased disability and eventual death. It is a horrible disease. Imagine if this was you who had just been given this diagnosis, or your loved one. Please take a moment and reflect how you could possibly feel in such a scenario. I understand that it is always hard to imagine if there is no reference point. But if this was your life suddenly, could you even dare to imagine the new trajectory? Frightening, isn't it? And yet here we were with our new life starkly presented before us. At home, we had left our 2 children being put to bed by their nanny, and suddenly life seemed strange, surreal, as if I was on a new highway that seemed to be hurtling me forward, but somehow I was watching it in slow motion. On arriving home, we couldn't bring ourselves to say much, and both Ed and I had different ways of dealing with issues. He was reflective, I was the doer, and thought as I did. But next day our life had to go on, at least for the moment, as if nothing was different, if for no other reason other than our children's lives would eventually be irrevocably changed. Driving my children to school that next morning, as if in a dream, I was astounded to see that everyone's life seemed to be going on as if nothing had changed. Why were their lives apparently the same? Life had shifted gears overnight dramatically, so surely theirs should have as well. Interesting how we view things at such times, and on reflection, how arrogant of me to even presume that no one else's life had changed, or that, for heaven's sakes, it should have changed. There started my journey of waking up, my journey to help my husband, to help myself, and hopefully to help my children. I was good at helping, that was what I did. We didn't go about our lives as Ed's neurologist had suggested, him prompting us to have that fairy tale holiday, which is how we both viewed such a suggestion. We'd had a great overseas holiday the year before and in normal circumstances, and faced with what was ahead of us, it didn't seem like the first thing that needed to be done. What would that achieve? Where would it leave us all? And why would that help us? Strange how when you decide to swim upstream rather than with the flow, how your realisations become clear, how you can see things differently, and with that develop a clarity that wasn't there before. Well, before there was no need, really. Firstly, we wanted to address how best to go about seeing what could be done in Ed's circumstances. We weren't looking at a mainstream approach, as there was none. We were looking to discover some alternative approach that may stem or slow this condition. Pie-in-the-sky approach, chasing moonbeams? Maybe, but it was what we felt we had to do. Did we struggle? Did we falter and fall? Did we cry, argue and feel petrified of what was ahead? Absolutely. Sometimes daily, sometimes multiple times. But through this initial frightful fog, it became clear to me that this was no ordinary journey. There was a purpose here with our circumstances, and that I at least had to explore and discover its significance. This then became the turning point in my life. There is a text from the play The Lockerbie Women by Deborah Bravute that I had read just a short while ago that best describes the journey that I took myself on and to some extent my family. Quote, "And believe that behind the suffering of the world there is purpose to everything. To believe that would mean that Adam died just so I could learn and grow." Unquote. And this truly became my mantra. How could I learn and grow out of these circumstances of ours, and how could all around me grow? Well, to learn and grow for myself, that was all well and good. But to expect that others may want to grow from our circumstances, that was just sheer folly. In my naivety and zealousness, I wanted to make the most of all that was before us. But this was my journey and mine alone. It wasn't necessarily anyone else's. Ed and I explored much together, but our paths differed somewhat due to Ed's Catholic upbringing. My spiritual perspective and growth had always been important to me, but now it became paramount. Not in the traditional sense, for sure, but rather, what was the meaning for us to find ourselves in such circumstances? What could we learn about ourselves, each other, and then about the world around us? Heavy stuff, you may think. But without this, what does life really consist of? To me, at least, life is about continuous growth and about being of service to others, however that may be. Be assured, this is not about having gained some zealous outlook or perspective that would carry us to some beautiful blue yonder. These questions relate to everyday life that, until I was thrown into these circumstances, were questions we had both discussed and argued about, but never really immersed ourselves in. Suddenly, I was immersed in the depths of life, and I had to find a way of swimming in these, at first, very choppy waters that seemed to throw me about on a regular basis as I floundered to find some buoyancy. At times I felt as if I was drowning, coming up for air, gulping, and thrown again into the depths of grief, despair, and seeming failure. So in order to find my own footing, I needed to find someone who could help me find my inner strength, my inner knowing that would guide me beyond my feelings of failure, despondency, and sheer panic. This I found in a man who was a spiritual psychotherapist, and for 8 long years he was my teacher and my guide to myself, as I discovered myself and therefore discovered anew the world around me. It was a journey through the corridors of my mind, confronting my shadows and realising my strengths. It was not a pretty journey, but it was one that has led me to become passionate about all the loving gifts that dying and death have to offer us, and that loss and grief dare to want to teach us. And it was for this reason that I embarked on a psychotherapy course. Life can be bewildering, and it can be a mystery in so many ways. Maybe dying seems frightening, such an unknown. But death, however it happens, is inevitable. What if, though, because death may seem such a mystery and such an unknown from when we are going to die to how we are going to die, we focused on life and how to live it authentically? We need to find the courage, as a community, to dare to discover. Would we then be able to see life through a different lens and therefore not carry the same level of fear? Could it be if we dive deeply into our hearts, we could find the love, the care, and the compassion necessary for our growth? Could it be that if we lived a deep and meaningful life, death would not hold the same paralysing fear for us? So, could we ask ourselves, how do we wish or choose to grow towards this final journey? And therefore, how do we wish to truly live out the life that precedes it? Surely then death and dying become such a rich ground for growth. Where else in life are we so confronted with all our life insecurities, from trying to avoid the damn thing, to switching off our emotions to it, to seeing that as just the end result of life and nothing else, or being mortified that we are left bereft and somehow with nothing to cling on to after the death of a loved one? If we dare contemplate on death of a loved one, of ourselves, of a patient, or of a friend, what happens? Is it really too harrowing? Well, maybe it is, but only because we have not dared to ask ourselves what it is about death that leaves us so inept and wanting. Could we, by looking within and discovering our own inadequacies, find some answers that would not only help us, but also our community? Our community so needs this dimension of life to be explored far more openly. Can we as a community summon enough courageous care to dare address this subject we try to avoid so valiantly? We live in a world of technological connection, but we know that in reality it is anything but. Do we know what our friend is truly experiencing? Do we even dare to ask? We live a fast-fueled life of texting, working, finding the next best thing to do depending on age, all the time hurtling towards our inevitable death without giving it a thought. Zenith Virago, calling herself a death walker, was interviewed in Monday's Age for yesterday's Dying to Know Day. Quote, "Everyone has the capacity and the courage to do death well. Most people who die well have lived well. So do we then arrive at our deathbed and ponder on the baggage that is sitting by our bedside and wonder what to do with it now? It seems unfriendly, cumbersome and so big, and yet to die feels frightening because there is unfinished business with this baggage. It appears not to want to leave us and it seems black and unyielding. We are there with our cumbersome friend, our baggage, and wonder why it has taken until now to realise it has been walking beside us all our life and constantly growing. But funnily, we have not seemed to notice it. Was it really always there? Or we are sitting with our dying loved one, they with their baggage friend and you with yours. What a foursome. What now? No one knows what to do. No one knows how to even attempt to resolve a lifetime of entangled emotions, disappointments and unspoken words. So what to do now? And what about the health professional who is walking with his own friend, his baggage, as he does his rounds at the hospice or the hospital? Surely it becomes quite crowded when in the dying person's room appears the health worker with her own baggage friend. Now there are 6 entities in the room trying to manage all the dynamics that are created in such a mix. Or a loved one dies unexpectedly and we seem as though we are suddenly left stranded and our baggage materialises as if from nowhere. So the question is, how can we learn to die well and how can we be witness to ourselves to know we have dared to live authentically? Fear is what we feel when we don't know what to do or the circumstances are not familiar, or that maybe we have missed something. Fear is what paralyses us and doesn't allow us to explore for fear of finding ourselves inadequate. Here already is a fertile ground of emotions that can be confronted, that can be explored, that can lead to wonderful realisations for our own growth and that of our community. This is my passion and my joy to be witness to people's emotional growth that I experience every day in my practice. And wouldn't it be healing to share with the greater community, be it in hospitals, hospices, aged care facilities, in the workplace, schools and the many organisations that are for the ill or their carers, to a better way of dying, death, loss and grief. Once we have confronted our fears, been willing and dared to explore them, we can come to a place that is the opposite of fear. And what is the opposite of fear? I love asking this question only because it is such a revelation. It is love, and only love. The more fear we release, the more love floods into our being, and when this happens, our heart can truly connect to our fellow being in deep reverence. Khalil Gibran writes, "You would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life?" Thank you.